The cruelest invitations are the ones wrapped in gold. Claire Morgan stared at the envelope for several seconds before touching it. It sat alone on her kitchen counter beside a half-finished cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Outside her apartment window, a gray February sky hung low over the city, and the faint sound of traffic drifted through the glass. The envelope looked expensive. Thick ivory paper. Gold lettering. The kind of invitation designed to announce not only a wedding, but a victory. Claire already knew who it was from before she opened it. Some names never really leave your life. They simply wait in quiet corners until something pulls them back into the light. She slid a finger beneath the seal and unfolded the card carefully. Ethan Walker and Vanessa Reed request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration. Claire read the sentence once. Then again. Not because she was shocked. The surprise had disappeared years ago, around the same time her marriage had. What held her attention was the small handwritten note at the bottom. Hope you've moved on. Ethan. Her eyes rested on the words. No anger crossed her face. No tears. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm has already destroyed everything it intended to destroy. She folded the card once, then twice, before setting it back on the counter. 3 years. 3 years since the divorce papers were signed in a lawyer's office that smelled like old carpet and stale coffee. 3 years since Ethan walked away convinced he was choosing a better future. Friends had taken sides. Some disappeared completely. Others offered sympathy that felt more like curiosity. Most assumed Claire would become another sad story people discussed over drinks. A woman left behind. A woman who gave too much and received too little. The truth was less dramatic. Life had simply continued. Bills still arrived. Morning still came. The world never stopped turning because someone broke your heart. Claire walked toward the window and crossed her arms. Somewhere across town, Ethan was probably finalizing seating charts and tasting wedding cakes. Maybe he imagined her opening the invitation. Maybe he pictured regret. Maybe he pictured loneliness. The thought almost made her smile. Her phone buzzed against the countertop. A text message appeared on the screen. Are we still on for dinner tonight? Claire looked at the message for a moment before typing a reply. Yes. And I have something interesting to show you. A few seconds later, the response arrived. Should I be worried? A small smile finally touched her lips. Not at all. She placed the phone down and glanced back at the invitation. Sunlight suddenly broke through the clouds, casting a narrow beam across the gold lettering. For a moment, the names shimmered under the light. Ethan Walker. Vanessa Reed. The future they wanted everyone to admire. Claire picked up the invitation one last time and slipped it into a drawer. Then she quietly opened her calendar and marked the date. She would attend. Not because she missed him. Not because she wanted answers. And certainly not because she wanted revenge. Some chapters deserve witnesses when they finally reach their ending. Across the city, Ethan believed he was inviting a forgotten woman to watch him win. What he didn't know was that Claire Morgan hadn't been standing still for the last 3 years. And what waited for him at that wedding was not the woman he remembered at all. People always remember the person who leaves. Very few remember the person who stays behind and rebuilds. 3 years earlier, Claire Morgan stood inside a nearly empty apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes. The wedding photos were already gone from the walls. The bookshelf Ethan had promised to assemble still leaned against the corner unopened. Through the living room window, she could see the lights of downtown Chicago flickering against the winter sky. Everything looked normal outside. Inside, an entire chapter of her life had quietly ended. The divorce had been finalized less than 48 hours earlier. No dramatic arguments. No scenes from a movie. Just signatures, paperwork, and a silence that somehow felt heavier than any fight they had ever had. Ethan Walker had left with confidence. The kind of confidence that came from believing the future belonged to him. At the time, most people agreed. Ethan was rising fast in the corporate world. Promotions arrived almost every year. His name appeared on industry articles. Recruiters called him constantly. He looked like a success story in progress. Claire looked like a footnote. Friends often forgot that before Ethan's career accelerated, Claire had been the one carrying most of the weight. She was the person who worked late shifts while Ethan finished certifications. She was the one who balanced budgets at the kitchen table. She was the one who listened to endless presentations before important meetings. Small sacrifices rarely become part of public memory. Success usually receives the spotlight. Support remains invisible. During the final year of their marriage, things began changing in ways that were difficult to explain. Ethan became harder to reach. Business trips became more frequent. Conversations became shorter. Dinners became quieter. There was never a single moment when everything collapsed. Instead, the distance grew 1 inch at a time until eventually they were living inside separate worlds while sharing the same address. Claire remembered one evening particularly well. She had prepared dinner and waited nearly 2 hours after his message said he was on the way home. By the time Ethan arrived, the food was cold. He barely noticed. He spent most of the meal checking emails on his phone. Claire had asked a simple question. "Are you happy?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the screen in his hand. Looking back, she realized that silence had answered everything. After the divorce, people expected her to chase explanations. They expected bitterness. Some even expected her to fight for attention. Claire did none of those things. She packed her belongings. She rented a smaller apartment. She found a new routine. Every morning she woke before sunrise. Every evening she returned home tired but moving forward. Progress was slow. Sometimes painfully slow. There were nights when she ate takeout alone while sorting through bills. Weekends when the quiet felt overwhelming. Moments when memories appeared unexpectedly in grocery store aisles or parking lots. But life kept moving. One day became 1 week. 1 week became 1 month. 1 month became 1 year. Eventually, the pain stopped being the first thing she noticed every morning. By the 2nd year, something surprising happened. She stopped measuring her life against Ethan's. She stopped wondering what he was doing. She stopped looking backward. The future no longer felt like something that had been taken from her. It felt like something waiting patiently ahead. And although Claire did not know it then, that future was already moving toward her from a direction she never expected. By the 3rd year, Claire Morgan had learned something most people never talked about. Healing was rarely dramatic. It did not arrive with a life-changing speech or a sudden breakthrough. Most of the time, it looked like ordinary Tuesdays. It looked like paying bills on time. It looked like grocery lists, morning coffee, and discovering that an entire day had passed without thinking about the person who once broke your heart. On a cool April evening, Claire left her office building just after 6 o'clock. The downtown sidewalks were crowded with commuters heading home. The city moved with its usual rhythm. Car horns echoed between buildings. Food trucks lined the street corners. People hurried past carrying briefcases and shopping bags. Claire adjusted the strap of her purse and started walking toward the parking garage 3 blocks away. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement. The workday had been long, but it was the kind of exhaustion she appreciated. Honest exhaustion. The kind earned through effort rather than worry. As she waited at a crosswalk, a sudden spring rain began falling from the darkening sky. Within seconds, umbrellas appeared everywhere. People rushed toward storefronts for shelter. Claire laughed quietly and glanced upward. Of course she had forgotten her umbrella. Again. She stepped beneath the awning of a small bookstore and watched the rain intensify. Water streamed down the windows. The city lights reflected across the wet pavement like scattered pieces of gold. Beside her, another person stood under the awning. A tall man wearing a navy overcoat and carrying a black umbrella. He appeared completely unbothered by the weather. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then a strong gust of wind pushed rain across the sidewalk and soaked the sleeve of Claire's jacket. The stranger looked over and offered a simple smile. "Looks like the weather had different plans tonight." Claire smiled back. "Apparently so." The man glanced toward the street. "Are you waiting for the rain to stop?" "I was hoping it would be polite enough to stop in the next 5 minutes." He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, warm and easy. Not the kind people used when trying to impress someone. "Unfortunately, I do not think nature received that request." Claire found herself laughing too. They stood there talking as the rain continued falling. Nothing remarkable. Just small conversation. Favorite coffee shops. Chicago traffic. The bookstore behind them. The kind of exchange most people would forget by the next morning. Yet something felt different. There was no performance in the conversation. No hidden agenda. No effort to prove anything. The man introduced himself simply as Damien. No title. No accomplishments. No mention of wealth or influence. Just Damien. When the rain finally softened, he opened his umbrella and offered to walk her to the garage. Claire hesitated briefly before accepting. Together they crossed the glowing sidewalks beneath the umbrella. Their pace was slow. Comfortable. The city buzzed around them while neither seemed in a hurry to end the conversation. When they reached the garage entrance, Damien stopped. "I have a feeling we will run into each other again." Claire tilted her head slightly. "That sounds surprisingly confident." "Not confident," he said with a smile. "Hopeful." For a moment, neither looked away. Then Claire smiled and stepped toward the entrance. As she disappeared inside the garage, Damien remained standing beneath the umbrella watching the rain fall around him. Neither of them knew it yet, but a chance meeting during a spring storm was about to change the direction of both their lives. Some people enter your life with grand promises. Others change your life simply by showing up exactly when they say they will. 2 weeks after the rainstorm, Claire arrived at a small coffee shop near the Chicago River just before 7 on a Saturday morning. The city was still waking up. A few runners moved along the waterfront trail. Delivery trucks rolled through quiet streets. The air carried the crisp scent of spring and freshly brewed coffee. Claire pushed open the glass door and immediately spotted Damien seated near the window. He stood when he saw her approaching. It was a small gesture, old-fashioned in a way that felt almost unusual. "Good morning," he said. "You are early." Claire glanced at her watch. "By 3 minutes." "Exactly. Early." She laughed and sat down. Over the next several weeks, that became their routine. Coffee on Saturdays. Long walks when the weather cooperated. Conversations that stretched far beyond what either expected. The strange thing was how little Damien talked about himself. Most successful people Claire had met enjoyed discussing achievements. Damien seemed more interested in asking questions. He wanted to know about her favorite books. Her childhood. The places she still wanted to visit. He listened carefully, remembering details she barely recalled mentioning. One afternoon, while walking through Millennium Park, Claire finally noticed something unusual. Damien's phone rang 3 times within 10 minutes. Each time, he glanced at the screen and silenced it without answering. "You must be very popular," she teased. Damien smiled. "Not particularly." A few moments later, another call appeared. Claire caught a glimpse of the screen before he put the phone away. The caller ID simply read "board meeting." She raised an eyebrow. Board meeting. Work can be persistent. And what exactly do you do? Damien looked ahead for a second. I help companies solve problems. Claire laughed. That is the most mysterious job description I have ever heard. It is technically accurate. The answer should have frustrated her. Instead, it made her smile. For the first time in years, she was spending time with someone who seemed completely uninterested in impressing anyone. Summer arrived. The city filled with festivals, outdoor concerts, and crowded patios. Claire found herself looking forward to every message from Damien. Yet even as their connection deepened, there remained pieces of his life she did not fully understand. Sometimes he disappeared for a day or two because of business travel. Sometimes strangers greeted him with unusual familiarity. Once, while they were having lunch, the manager personally came over to thank Damien for visiting. Another time, Claire noticed several employees in a hotel lobby suddenly straighten their posture when he walked by. Small moments. Easy to dismiss. Yet they continued appearing. One evening they attended a charity fundraiser hosted inside a historic downtown building. Claire almost declined the invitation. Formal events reminded her too much of a life she had left behind. But Damien convinced her to come. As they entered the ballroom, several people immediately approached him. Their reaction surprised her. Some seemed genuinely excited to see him. Others appeared nervous. One man nearly dropped his drink while shaking Damien's hand. Claire watched carefully. The respect in the room was impossible to ignore. "Who are you?" she asked quietly once they were alone again. Damien smiled. The expression carried both amusement and patience. "Just someone who enjoys your company." It was not really an answer. Yet somehow it was enough. Because for the first time in a very long time, Claire was no longer searching for reasons to trust someone. She was simply learning how to trust again. And without realizing it, she was slowly becoming part of a world far larger than anything she imagined. The strongest relationships are often the ones nobody notices. Nearly 18 months passed before Claire fully understood how much her life had changed. There had been no dramatic turning point. No grand announcement. Just 1,000 small moments that quietly built something real. By then, Damien had become part of her everyday life. He knew how she took her coffee. He remembered important meetings at work. He sent her photographs whenever he traveled, not of luxury hotels or famous restaurants, but of ordinary things he thought would make her smile. A bookstore in Seattle. A golden retriever sleeping inside an airport terminal. A sunset over Lake Michigan. The simplicity mattered more than expensive gestures ever could. One autumn afternoon, Claire was organizing files at her office when her phone buzzed. A single message appeared on the screen. "Are you free tonight?" She smiled. That question had become familiar. Her reply came seconds later. "Depends. Should I expect another mysterious dinner invitation?" Damien answered almost immediately. "Worse." Claire laughed quietly. "Now I am concerned." The next message arrived. "Good. Meet me at 7. When Claire arrived that evening, she found Damien waiting near the waterfront. The air carried the first hints of winter. Streetlights reflected across the dark water. Boats rocked gently in their slips. The city skyline glowed behind them. "You still have not explained why I should be worried," Claire said. Damien smiled. "Walk with me." They moved slowly along the harbor. For several minutes neither spoke. The only sounds were distant traffic and waves brushing against the docks. Eventually Damien stopped beside a quiet section of the walkway overlooking the lake. He looked unusually nervous. Claire noticed immediately. It was the first time she had ever seen uncertainty in his expression. "That is new," she said softly. "What is?" "You being nervous." Damien laughed under his breath. I am glad it is noticeable. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Claire stared at it for a second before looking back at him. The city around them suddenly felt very far away. Claire, he said quietly, you spent a long time rebuilding your life. I know because I watched you do it. Every step. Every challenge. Every victory. His voice remained calm, but his eyes never left hers. And every day I become more grateful that I happened to be standing under that bookstore awning. Claire felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. Damien. He opened the box. Inside rested a simple diamond ring. Elegant. Timeless. Nothing excessive. I am not asking because I need someone beside me, he said. I am asking because life became better the moment you walked into it. Tears gathered in Claire's eyes before she could stop them. Not tears of sadness. Not tears of relief. Something deeper. The realization that she no longer viewed herself as someone recovering from the past. She had become someone moving toward the future. Yes, she whispered. Then she laughed through her tears. Yes, of course. Damien smiled, and for a moment neither spoke. The lake shimmered behind them. The skyline glowed above them. The world continued moving exactly as it always had. Yet everything felt different. What happened next surprised many people. They did not announce the engagement publicly. They did not post photographs online. They did not seek attention. Months later, they quietly married in a private ceremony attended only by a handful of family members and close friends. No headlines. No social media celebration. No public spectacle. Their happiness belonged to them. Which was exactly why almost nobody from Claire's former life knew she was married. And 3 years after her divorce, while Ethan Walker prepared for his highly public wedding, he remained completely unaware that Claire Morgan was already somebody else's wife. The invitation remained in Claire's desk drawer for almost a week before she looked at it again. Not because she was avoiding it. The truth was much simpler. It no longer occupied her thoughts the way it once might have. Life had become full. Work deadlines, weekend plans, dinners with Damien, family visits, and countless ordinary moments had quietly replaced the space that old memories once controlled. Still, the wedding date continued approaching. One evening, Claire sat at the dining table while the invitation rested beside her untouched coffee mug. Across from her, Damien reviewed documents on a tablet. The soft glow of the city skyline filled the windows behind them. Their apartment overlooked the river, and the reflections of downtown lights shimmered across the water below. Claire turned the envelope over in her hands. I still cannot decide whether this is strange or amusing, she said. Damien looked up. The invitation. The handwritten note. Damien smiled faintly. The one that assumes he knows how your life turned out. Claire laughed. Exactly. For a moment she studied the gold lettering again. 3 years earlier, receiving that invitation would have reopened wounds. Now it felt oddly distant. Like reading about a person she used to know. Do you want to go? Damien asked. Claire considered the question carefully. I think I do. Then we should go. The answer arrived so naturally that she smiled. You are making that sound very simple. It is simple. Damien set the tablet aside. The complicated part already happened years ago. Claire looked at him quietly. He was right. The difficult nights. The rebuilding. The loneliness. The uncertainty. All of that belonged to the past. Attending a wedding was easy compared to surviving what came before it. Several days later, the response card was mailed. Claire Morgan. Attending. Number of guests, 2. Nothing more. No explanation. No additional details. No mention of who would accompany her. Somewhere across the city, wedding preparations continued. Ethan and Vanessa finalized guest lists. Floral arrangements. Seating charts. Music selections. Hundreds of details demanding attention. When Claire's response arrived, Ethan glanced at it briefly before setting it aside. Claire was coming. That much was expected. What caught his attention was the second guest. Who do you think she is bringing? Vanessa asked while reviewing place cards. Ethan shrugged. Probably a friend. Vanessa smiled. Or maybe she wants everyone to think she has a boyfriend. Ethan laughed softly. Maybe. Neither spent much time thinking about it afterward. There were too many other things to focus on. Meanwhile, Claire's preparations remained remarkably ordinary. She did not shop for a dramatic dress. She did not rehearse conversations. She did not imagine confrontations. Instead, she selected a classic navy evening gown she already owned. Elegant. Timeless. Comfortable. The kind of choice made by someone attending an event rather than making a statement. On the morning of the wedding, sunlight poured through the apartment windows. Chicago's skyline sparkled beneath a clear blue sky. Claire stood in front of the mirror adjusting a simple pair of earrings. Her reflection looked calm. Not nervous. Not excited. Simply at peace. A soft knock sounded at the bedroom door. Damien stepped inside wearing a tailored charcoal suit. For a moment Claire just looked at him. Even after all this time, there was something steady about his presence that made everything around him feel quieter. Damien smiled. Ready? Claire glanced at herself one last time before turning toward him. Then she smiled back. Yes. Together they walked toward the front door. Neither realized that before the evening ended, an entire ballroom would be talking about the man whose name had never appeared on the response card. The ballroom was already glowing when Claire and Damien arrived. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across polished marble floors. Soft music drifted through the air while servers moved between groups of guests carrying trays of champagne. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, turning the city itself into part of the evening's decoration. Conversations filled the room. Laughter echoed from every corner. It was exactly the kind of wedding designed to impress people. Claire stepped inside and immediately recognized several familiar faces from years ago. Former colleagues. Old friends. People who once knew intimate details of her life and now knew almost nothing about it. A few noticed her arrival and exchanged surprised glances. Others smiled politely before returning to their conversations. Time had created distance, but curiosity remained. Beside her, Damien appeared completely comfortable. Calm as always. Unhurried. Almost invisible despite standing taller than most people in the room. They checked their coats and moved toward the reception area. Within minutes, whispers began circulating through nearby groups. Claire Morgan was here. And she had not come alone. Across the ballroom, Ethan Walker stood speaking with several guests near the stage. His tuxedo fit perfectly. Confidence seemed to follow him wherever he went. When someone quietly mentioned Claire's arrival, he instinctively turned toward the entrance. His eyes found her almost immediately. For a brief moment, his expression froze. Claire looked different. Not because of the dress. Not because of her appearance. There was simply a piece about her that he did not remember. The nervousness that once appeared around him was gone. She was smiling. Relaxed. Entirely at ease. Then Ethan noticed the man standing beside her. He studied Damien for several seconds. Attractive. Well-dressed. Confident. Yet strangely familiar. Ethan could not place him. Before he could think further, Vanessa appeared beside him and followed his gaze across the room. That must be her guest, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. I suppose so. Vanessa examined Claire from a distance. Her smile remained polite, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting. Several minutes later, fate brought all four of them together near the bar. The encounter felt inevitable. Claire greeted them warmly. No tension. No bitterness. No trace of resentment. Congratulations, she said sincerely. Vanessa thanked her while Ethan offered a polite smile. Then his attention shifted toward Damien. I do not think we have met. Damien extended his hand. Damien. Ethan shook it. Ethan. There was a brief pause. Ethan waited for more. A last name. A company. Some explanation. None came. Damien simply smiled. Vanessa broke the silence. So what do you do, Damien? Claire nearly laughed because she already knew how unpredictable that answer could be. Damien remained perfectly calm. Business. Vanessa smiled politely. That sounds important. Sometimes. The conversation drifted elsewhere, but the exchange left an impression. As the evening continued, more guests noticed Claire and Damien together. Some quietly compared them to Ethan and Vanessa. Others speculated about Damien's background. The mystery seemed to grow with every passing minute. Yet the strangest part was how little Damien appeared to care. While others measured status, titles, and appearances, he spent most of the evening focused entirely on Claire. Listening when she spoke. Smiling when she laughed. Making her feel like the most important person in the room. Across the ballroom, Ethan occasionally found himself glancing in their direction. He could not explain why. Something about Damien felt familiar. And with every passing minute, the feeling became harder to ignore. Recognition rarely arrives with a warning. Sometimes it enters a room quietly and changes everything in a matter of seconds. The reception was well underway when the moment finally happened. Guests mingled beneath the chandeliers while waitstaff refreshed drinks and cleared dinner plates. Conversations flowed easily. Laughter drifted across the ballroom. On the surface, everything appeared exactly as it should. Yet beneath that polished atmosphere, curiosity about Claire's mysterious companion continued growing. Near one side of the ballroom, a group of executives from various Chicago firms gathered around a cocktail table discussing business. One of them happened to glance across the room and suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence. His eyes locked on Damien. For several seconds, he simply stared. Another executive followed his gaze. Then another. Their expressions changed almost instantly. That cannot be him, one of them whispered. The first man set down his glass without looking away. It is him. Within moments, the group began moving across the ballroom. Claire noticed them approaching but thought little of it. Damien remained completely relaxed. The first executive reached them and extended his hand immediately. Mr. Sterling, he said. I was not expecting to see you here tonight. Claire saw several nearby guests turn their heads. Damien smiled politely. Good evening, Robert. The executive laughed in disbelief. You remember my name? Of course. The man's expression brightened. It has been almost 4 years. Some conversations are worth remembering. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, but it created a ripple effect throughout the room. People began watching more closely. Another executive arrived. Then another. Within minutes, several prominent business leaders had gathered around Damien. Their reactions ranged from admiration to outright astonishment. Across the ballroom, Ethan noticed the unusual activity. So did Vanessa. Why is everyone suddenly talking to him? She asked quietly. Ethan frowned. I do not know. A few tables away, one guest pulled out a phone and searched a name. Seconds later, his eyes widened. He turned the screen toward the person beside him. The reaction repeated itself again and again. Small pockets of surprise spread through the ballroom like falling dominoes. Eventually one of Ethan's colleagues approached him. His expression looked almost confused. "You know who that is, right?" Ethan shook his head. "Should I?" The colleague blinked. "That is Damien Sterling." The name landed heavily. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He knew the name immediately. Everyone in his industry knew it. Damien Sterling was not simply successful. He was one of the most influential business leaders in the country. Financial publications featured him regularly. Universities invited him to speak. Major corporations competed for opportunities to work with his companies. Ethan had read interviews with him for years. He had studied leadership articles that quoted him. He had once attended an industry conference where Damien's keynote address drew thousands of attendees. And now that familiar feeling from earlier finally made sense. Ethan had seen his face countless times before. He simply never expected to find him standing beside Claire. Across the room, Vanessa looked equally stunned. "Wait," she whispered. "You mean that Damien Sterling?" Ethan nodded slowly. Neither spoke for several seconds. Meanwhile, Claire stood quietly beside her husband while guests continued introducing themselves. The irony was almost invisible. The room was reacting to Damien's status. Claire was not. Because unlike everyone else there, she had never fallen in love with a title. She had fallen in love with the man who stood beneath a bookstore awning during a spring rainstorm. And somehow, that realization made the silence spreading through the ballroom even more powerful. The room never fully recovered from the revelation. Conversations continued, music still played, and guests smiled for photographs, but something fundamental had shifted. People looked at Claire differently now. Not because she had arrived with wealth. Not because of status. But because they suddenly realized how little they actually knew about the life she had built after walking away. Claire noticed the attention and ignored it. She had spent too many years learning how to find peace to lose it over a room full of opinions. Beside her, Damien remained exactly the same man he had been that rainy afternoon years ago. He spoke politely with guests. Thanked servers by name. Listened more than he talked. The only thing that had changed was what everyone else now understood about him. Across the ballroom, Ethan stood near one of the reception tables watching the crowd gather around Claire and Damien. For the first time all evening, he looked uncertain. Not jealous. Not angry. Simply thoughtful. The confidence he had carried throughout the wedding seemed quieter now. He glanced around the room and noticed something unexpected. No one was discussing Claire as his former wife. They were discussing her as a woman who had moved forward. A woman who had built a life entirely separate from him. Somehow that realization felt larger than Damien's success. It forced him to confront something he had never considered. Claire's story had continued after he left. The wedding reception slowly moved toward its final hours. Guests began collecting coats. Farewells filled the ballroom. The city lights beyond the windows shimmered against the dark night sky. Claire and Damien decided it was time to leave. Neither enjoyed being the center of attention, and the evening had already become far more memorable than either expected. As they made their way toward the exit, Ethan approached them. Vanessa stood beside him. For a moment, all four simply looked at one another. Years of history existed in that silence. Yet there was no hostility inside it. Only perspective. Ethan smiled first. It was smaller than the smiles he had worn throughout the evening. More genuine. "Thank you for coming," he said. Claire returned the smile. "Thank you for inviting us." Ethan nodded. Then his attention shifted briefly toward Damien. "It was good meeting you." "Likewise," Damien replied. Another silence followed. This one softer than before. Ethan looked back at Claire. The woman standing in front of him was not the person he remembered from years ago. She no longer carried disappointment. She no longer needed validation. The sadness he once associated with her was gone. In its place stood confidence, grace, and something even rarer. Freedom. You seem happy, Ethan said quietly. Claire glanced at Damien before looking back at him. I am. There was nothing else to add. No speech. No dramatic revelation. No attempt to settle old scores. Just the truth. Ethan nodded slowly. I am glad. Claire believed him. Outside, the cool night air greeted them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. The sounds of the city drifted through the darkness. Cars passed beneath glowing streetlights. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the skyline. Damien gently reached for Claire's hand. She smiled and intertwined her fingers with his. Together they began walking toward the waiting car. Neither looked back. Behind them, the wedding celebration continued. Ahead of them stretched a life they had built together, one quiet day at a time. And as the city lights reflected across the river, Claire realized something she wished she could have told her younger self years ago. The greatest victory was never proving someone wrong. It was creating a life so full, so peaceful, and so meaningful that the need for revenge simply disappeared. She had not won Ethan back. She had won herself.